So Bob got some emails. Let's read them and answer them. What do you say?
Yes.
Patron Orla from Ireland says, how do you deal with the emotional aspect of contracting COVID twice when you are fully vaccinated? I am 38 weeks pregnant and I got COVID for the second time in my pregnancy. I've worked hard for so long following government advice and all the other things. So I was very disappointed to have gotten it twice. Bob, what do you think?
I am so sorry. Ugh, that's it. I hope you and your kid are okay. I don't know anything about immune and that, like I don't know any of the technical stuff about that. I just feel sad for you. That sucks.
Yeah, the emotional aspect is rough. On one hand, we have a lot of reasons to be scared, to be frustrated with society,
Yeah.
to be worried about the future, to be concerned with passing on the virus to someone else. And uh, so, but from the beginning, what I've been saying is, and this is a model for anxiety in a lot of situations, if not every situation, is that anxiety and the emotional reaction is helpful. When a tiger is chasing us, we have fear and we run. Fight or flight reaction, it saves our lives. When our loved one is in danger and we feel fear for them and we try to help them, our emotional response is helpful. So when you contract COVID and you have an emotional reaction, it's a helpful emotion. Emotions are, when I figured this out, and I'm sure I was told a thousand times, but it really just didn't really click with me until past few years. Emotions are motivators. They're emotions are responses to interpretations of what's happening. So something's happening, we interpret it, and then our emotion kicks in to motivate us to solve a problem. Emotions are problem-solving motivators. And when you have COVID and you're angry about it, what is your emotion trying to tell you? If you're scared about it, what's your emotion trying to tell you? If you're scared, in all likelihood, your fear is trying to motivate you to do everything you can to be safe. And so listen to that emotion and do what needs to be done to be safe. If you've done everything that you can do within reason to be safe and you still feel fear, again, reevaluate that. Maybe you're afraid of something else, like the fact that you don't have a will, or you're worried about the care of your child. Maybe there's some things you need to take care of. So allow the motivation to happen and to take those actions. Then once you've done all the actions that you can do, that your emotions are trying to tell you, and you have any more anxiety, that's the extra anxiety that is no longer useful. And then you want to try to mitigate it as best you can. You want to remind yourself, hey, self, I've done everything I can. There's no more reason for me to feel afraid anymore. I'm not going to ruminate on this anymore because I've done everything. I've evaluated what this emotion is telling me. I've taken the actions. I've crossed everything off my list. This is all extra emotion. It's no longer helpful. And doesn't mean it takes the anxiety away, but it does contextualize it. It's like, okay, I hear you, emotion. I got it. I took your advice. I took the action. Enough already, because now you're actually ruining my sleep, which actually harms my ability to recover from this. And, back off. So that's my general model of dealing with anxiety or any emotion in any situation. Because what a lot of people do is they just sit there and they're like, I'm afraid. How do I cope? Quote unquote, but really saying is, how do I get rid of the fear? When your fear is there for a reason and you want to listen to it. And if you take action, and there's a good chance that your fear will go away, because your fear is like, okay, good, you did everything. And another part of it, getting back to what I was saying before, is it might even be an existential fear of death, and this fear might be motivating you to wrestle with the meaning of that and the reality of that. Because if you never actually wrestle with the meaning of your death and your transient nature on this in this universe, then you'll continually be reminded of your inevitable demise and have fear, and then you go into denial and you submerge the fear and submerge the reality, and but that anxiety is just chugging along inside of you. And so sometimes you have to, and COVID really makes all of us face that, and all of us realize we're all going to die one day. And what does that mean? And have I reckoned with that? And what do I need to do to reckon with that? Have I familiarized myself with that reality? Have I done all the things that I need to do so that if I knew I was going to die tomorrow, although I'd be sad, at least I didn't waste my time on this planet and in my relationships. These are important things to wrestle with, and they're not small things. They're big things. Something I've been wrestling with since I was a teenager, almost on a daily basis. Not so much recently, because I feel like it took me 30 years to wrestle sufficiently, at least this phase. But it's complicated, and that's my answer to that question. Bob, do you wrestle with your demise?
Since I was 38, I have been afraid of dying. I'm 54 now. And there's times when I feel terrified of that. And then there's times when I feel like Colleen was talking about that this morning. At some point, we're going to be saying goodbye to one another. Who knows who's going first? Though I did make a deal with her. I'm going first. She doesn't like that deal, but I think that's the right deal. Anyways, I said to her, well, we ain't dead yet. And we got now. And today's a good day. It's Monday. So, we get to make the most of our time together today, which felt really good. I don't usually feel good when I think about stuff like that, but it felt really good to think about making the most of my time with Colleen right now.
Why did you start wrestling with it at 38?
Oh, I think it became apparent to me that I wasn't immortal. I heard this thing when I was in college. I said, well, adolescents, they thrive on a sense of immortality. And I've noticed that sometime in my 30s, it became apparent to me that I was going to die. And, not like I didn't know it, but like the emotional impact of it started landing. And somehow when I was 38, it was more intense than previous, where I just recognized it's all temporary. And at some point I will cease to be. The thing that makes me the most sad about it is all the experience gathered inside my body, inside my brain, will be lost.
Yeah.
That makes me sad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it took a long time to learn how to do therapy, like how to be a therapist. It took a long time to learn how to do that. I'll be sad if I lose that.
Right.
I'll be sad for that to have.
Yeah. As the world will as well. Yeah. I don't know why I've always thought about it, but have since I was a teen, and thought about it a lot.
Did it scare you when you was little?
No, it's never, people always say, oh, Kirk has this fear of death. I'm not afraid of death. I'm afraid of not existing. I'm afraid of not being. I'm afraid of, and I'm not afraid so much as extremely disappointed.
Yeah.
That's how the universe works. Yeah. Maybe there's an afterlife. I suppose there's a chance, but if there isn't, then what a terrible curse we have as a species that we're aware of it.
Yeah.
And, because I look at my dogs and I'm pretty sure they're not aware of it. People could argue that maybe they are, but I don't know. They have a hard time understanding some pretty basic things. I imagine they don't understand, or at least they don't understand it at a level we do. And I just, I envy their ignorance.
Yeah.
It's like they can live in the moment and not have to contemplate that. As time went on, I learned kind of in the last 5 to 10 years to have some peace with it. I'd say 90% peace with it.
Mm.
But every once in a while, especially late at night, it'll just occur to me, oh my God, one day I'm just going to be gone.
Yeah.
I'm just going to be completely non-existent.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never be able to see or hear or touch or think or be again. And everything I am and everything I was and everything I will be will just be erased. And then a generation later, no one will even remember me. And any evidence of me will just be completely gone or buried underneath a mountain of data on the internet. And it's like I never was, and it's disappointing. Like, why does it have to be that way? And another disappointing aspect of it is there's a chance in 500 years people will never die because we'll have the technology to keep us alive and keep us actually comfortable. Not some sort of zombie apocalypse, but some way of actually biologically keeping us, because there's a lot of things pointing at there's no reason why we have to die, why our telomeres have to fray, why our organs have to fail. There's a lot of science saying, like, it's not inconceivable. It's not like it's written in stone that all organisms must perish, especially when you start thinking about interfaces with computers and whatnot. And it's just ironic, or in the Alanis Morissette sense, that in 500 years, we might be one of the last generations to actually die. And we would have missed it after 200,000 years of humans existing on this planet. We barely missed the beginning of immortality for humans. And who knows if that's true, but if that is true, it does kind of suck. And there's actually a movie about it with Jared Leto, where he's the last human to die on the planet. And it's kind of an interesting movie. Anyway, anonymous annual patron, she says, can therapy sessions exceed 1 hour regularly? I'm noticing in my sessions that it takes almost the entire hour to become comfortable enough to start being vulnerable in any way. So we spend 40 minutes in uncomfortable silence or avoidant small talk until finally there's a little shift and we get about 15 minutes of real talk. This has been going on for over 3 years now, so it's not a matter of length of time in therapy. I don't want to go to therapy twice a week. If I was there for 2 back-to-back sessions, then maybe the first hour would continue to be getting comfortable, but I would still have the entire hour to get to the real issues. I heard that insurance can push back on this, and the therapist could get audited. Opinions, experience, or thoughts on longer sessions? Are they a possibility if you rely on insurance to cover the cost of therapy? Bob, what do you think?
Yeah, you can ask. I know somebody who works at a tech company around here, and there's some modifier code that they wanted to have 90-minute sessions with me. And so they told me that just put this modifier code on the bill, and they could submit that and get some coverage from their insurer.
Yeah.
So, but there's some research on, as I understand it, but it's been a long time. There's some research on how people use therapy time, and if I remember right, what they said is people start making the most of it at about 40 minutes into a 50 or 60-minute session.
On average, of course.
Yeah, on average, yeah. Though I think it'd probably be a good idea for you to talk about the lag that you're experiencing. I had a similar thought last week when I was in my own therapy session, and what I've come to believe is that it takes my brain a while to just settle in. I think I spend a lot of the week in a certain state of mind. And when I go into therapy and there's this focus, this particular focus, it takes me a while to shake it loose. So I sort of expect that that's just the case. So, anyways, that's just my experience. I don't know. Anyways, so this possibility, if I remember right, the modifier code was 76.
Yeah, I'm no expert, but there are new codes actually starting in 2020 that allow for sessions longer than an hour. And some insurance companies will pay more for those and some don't. So if you're, an anonymous patron, if you're going to your therapist and you're asking, and your therapist is open to doing 2-hour sessions, there's a possibility that insurance won't even pay for it.
Yeah.
So it'd be, it's not usually doable for therapists. Essentially, they'd be offering a pro bono hour every week for you, which is hard, because people need to pay their bills. But there's a possibility that with the new code, they would allow for that. But insurance companies are pretty notorious for shaving costs wherever they can. And since there isn't a big public outcry for this to be covered by insurance, then I'm guessing that there's not going to be a lot of movement in that area. So, and then you bring up some other things, anonymous patron, that I'm guessing your therapist might have told you of. You're saying, I heard that insurance can push back on this. And that issue is, it depends on the insurance, but usually insurance doesn't push back. They have much bigger fish to fry. I mean, medical insurance, they're paying like $100,000 for hospital stays. They're not super concerned with mental health coverage. So if some increase in your usage were to happen, it probably just wouldn't even show up. And it's not worth it for them to push back on that. So I can't imagine. I mean, some insurance companies like United or Cigna, they're really notoriously bad when it comes to this kind of pushback action. So I don't know if that's what you're faced with, but there's that. And then you also mentioned, your therapist could audit it. Well, audits are, the only reason why you'd be concerned about that is if you're actually not doing something correct or if you're actually fraudulent. So, of course, you don't want to go into that zone, because the way you could fraudulently bill for this is actually bill for 2 sessions and claim they were at different times, even in the same day, when in reality it was just one long session. And that would be fraud, because you'd be lying and you'd be saying there were 2 sessions instead of one long session. So you don't want to do something like that. But I've done this. I mean, how many times have you done this, Bob, where you've had longer than an hour session?
Many times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some couples used to like to come for 90 minutes.
Yeah. Actually, traditionally, couples was always 90 minutes.
Yeah.
It was too much to cover in an hour.
Yeah.
And families as well. It was always at least 90 minutes. And back in the day, with families in particular, they would be longer than an hour. For individuals, though?
Occasionally, not often, but occasionally someone will want to have a longer session.
Yeah. For this reason?
Yeah.
It takes them a while to loosen up.
Loosen up or settle in or.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've done it. I could think of maybe 3 times, and not because I'm against it so much that no one's really pushed for it, aside from a few times. And I found that I don't know if it really helped. The things that they were trying to adjust for, I don't remember thinking, whoa, this really opened things up. I don't really remember that. I will say that the general issue of having it take time to get into the swing of things in session has been something that's happened a lot. And so what I have done over time, because I don't know, I just figure let's try to make the hour work, is I will talk with the client about it. And then, because I get concerned, for the work that the client is doing. I'm like, we're really scratching the surface for the first 40 minutes. Like one client that I worked with for a long time, I told her that if we don't, if I, as the therapist, don't end the small talk, we'll do that the whole session, and you don't seem to complain about it. And I don't know if that's the best use of your time. Do you? And she was like, well, I guess not. And I said, well, this is what I'm going to do. We'll do our small talk for 25 minutes because my sessions, a lot of people's sessions typically are 50 or 55 minutes. Then at that 25-minute mark, I'm just going to ask you, how are you feeling? And I'm not going to let you go back to small talk. And how does that feel to you? And she's like, yeah, that's probably best. And so she would sit down and she would just launch into, if anyone were watching, they would just think we were friends or colleagues and talking about just random things about our family or work or something. And then at 25 minutes, I would stop, take a deep breath and say, how are you feeling? And she would just break down crying pretty much 95% of the time. And that's when the real work began. But if I didn't do anything, then it would never happen. And she would never complain because of her relational traumas, to put it in a short way. So there's a way to do it. And it's not without its anxiety for you, anonymous annual patron. If you implemented this with your therapist, it might be uncomfortable. You're saying you spend 40 minutes in uncomfortable silence or avoidant small talk until finally there's a little shift. There's a possibility that the little shift is only happening because that the session is almost over and there's less possibility of prolonged vulnerability. This is what we call the doorknob. What do they call it? Doorknob revelation?
Revelation, something like that.
Because for a lot of clients, when their hand touches the doorknob as they're heading out of the office, that's when they actually reveal things that you were like, oh, we should have said that in the beginning of the session. Mm-hmm. Because vulnerability is hard and it's easier to avoid it. But there's a part of you that wants to reveal it. So you could work with your therapist to say, okay, let's give us 20, 25 minutes of small talk, but then I need you as a therapist to push me to deepen and to actually make this session useful. Another thing that I will do with clients is I'll stop and I'll say, so I just wanted to ask you, what you wanted to get done today. I noticed you're talking a lot about your family or work, and we could talk about that, but I just wanted to check in with you and ask you, like, is this how you wanted to spend your time? Because I want to make sure that you're getting the most out of therapy, and this is also a tip for you therapists listening out there. It's easy, especially when you have 35 clients a week. Sometimes you just want to kick back, and if the client's going to let you, then you just small talk your way through it. And it was, every time I shifted with clients like this, it was work. It takes emotional and sometimes kind of physical effort to push past, kind of interrupt the client, to open both of ourselves up to some complications. So that's what. Do you ever do that with clients, Bob, where you have to say, hey, should we shift this to be deeper? It's initiated by you and not the client.
Constantly, because people, or I don't know about people. I'm thinking of a couple people that I'm seeing right now who can be very topic focused. And I just am relentlessly bringing it back to what's happening between us right now. What is it wanted? Because there's always something wanted that's implicitly it's in the room, it's unspoken. So learning about what that is, because I want is a really vulnerable thing. So if I find myself engaged in small talk, say, then I get to highlight that. Or if I find myself engaged in a topic, I get to highlight that, and ask what's wanted out of, this thing that you're describing right now. Can you pay attention to what it is that you want? And how is this feeling as you tell me? A lot of the times I think it's anxious and avoidance. But, I think relationally all the time nowadays, and I'm thinking of somebody in particular, and when they come in, they talk about their primary relationship, and they are sort of focused on kind of what's been happening or speaking about it in somewhat general, sort of 10,000-foot terms. And I am constantly bringing it back to what's happening between you and me right now as you describe all this. What is it? Not confrontive. I don't believe in confronting.
Right.
What's wanted, though, like, you're important. You're important, and how you feel and what you want is really important. So can we be clear about what it is that's wanted? I think for that person in particular, becoming clear and explicit about what they want out of our thing is likely to translate really well into them getting what they want out of their primary relationship.
Yeah.
So I'm relentlessly bringing the focus out of small talk. I don't do small talk. I'm constantly bringing it back out of what's going on right now. Oh yeah, look, this is that thing that you do. Oh, are we engaged in small? Is that what you want to do? Right? Oh, okay. Because if somebody said to me, "Yeah, Bob, that's what I want to do," I'd be like, "Okay, great. That's you asserting what you want. Great."
Yeah. You're cognizant of what you're doing. You're not just mindlessly doing something that you're used to or you feel like you're supposed to.
It's the difference between process and topic, content, process. And I try to stay in the process.
Do you remember, and maybe still, there's a fear there as a therapist?
Oh yeah.
You're taking a step into the unknown.
Oh, it's scary.
Yeah. And you could see novice or unwise therapists avoiding that whole thing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think it is that we're afraid of?
I think we're afraid of intimacy.
Why are we afraid of intimacy?
I don't know. We're seen, we're vulnerable. Like, honest to God, Kirk, you know what? I try not to be a therapist. I try to just be a human. And I can't tell you how many times in an average week I say, "Oh God, I sound like a damn therapist. Let me try that again," and try to be genuine. Now, genuine doesn't mean I talk about me or I disclose a lot. And sometimes I do, but it's not about shifting focus. It's about being immediate. What's happening right now in my relationship with my person that I'm talking to right now? Being open and vulnerable about that. Learning about what's happening in the other. Using my experience as a way to kind of get a sense of where's the other. All that stuff that you get trained to do and you practice doing and you develop a capacity for over
Do
time.
people get trained to do that? I don't know, but as time goes on, I don't know if it's trends or what, but I worry that a lot of therapists are not being trained to do what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, even the thing is like there's this push for, like these evidence-based treatments like cognitive behavioral therapy and that sort of thing. A good cognitive behavioral therapist is still process focused, is still paying attention to the experience of the client. They might not have that explicit in a manual, but I should hope that we would be paying attention to the person that we're in front of and not the strategy or the technique or the goal or whatever. Sort of like that old one about you row your boat out and you rescue somebody out of the water and then you row your boat back in and you discover they're not in your boat anymore.
Yeah.
You got to be with them where they are.
So when you hear the phrase evidence-based practice for yourself and maybe what you think other people are referring to, they're referring only to cognitive behavior therapy, do you think?
I think you said something about this a couple podcasts ago and it struck me because you were talking about there's evidence for relationally based therapy.
A lot of evidence, including psychodynamic therapy.
Yeah.
Interpersonal.
Right.
There's evidence for humanistic therapy. In fact, when you look at the common factors of therapy that have strong evidence, like empathy working, alliance working, these are all humanistic and psychodynamic ideas. They are not cognitive behavioral ideas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even specifically, interpretation is an evidence-based practice that they found. They have mounds of evidence showing that interpreting people's personality and their situation and their relationships and their patterns has positive outcomes. And it really is a marketing coup that when people say evidence-based practice, they think cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah.
It's like tissue paper and Kleenex. When you think of tissue paper, especially not so much anymore, but when we were growing up, there was just one brand of tissue paper, it was Kleenex. You didn't have alternative brands of tissue paper, or there was one brand of copy machine and it was a Xerox.
The Xerox, right?
To the point where when to copy something was to Xerox it. And that's marketing. That's Madison Avenue trying to monopolize something. And cognitive behavioral therapy has won the day against all science. It is evidence-based for certain things. It works pretty well for certain limited things. It doesn't work very well for some other things, the way that psychodynamic therapy does. Plus, when you understand, and this is my soapbox, but when you understand how research on manualized treatments work, you understand that this sort of field is hard to know anything about anything. And as I always say, cognitive therapy, I use all the time. Behavioral therapy, I use all the time. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying the fact that we have said evidence-based therapy equals cognitive behavioral therapy and nothing else is
right.
And, for tissue paper, who cares? But this is human lives on the line. People are coming into therapy and they need tailored treatment to their problem. And if everyone is using one form of therapy for every single client that comes in the door without consideration of the client's needs, then people are being misserved and potentially even dying because of suicide because they're not getting the treatment they need is my thing. It's not a small thing. And also the problem is, it'd be one thing if the public thought this, but this is within our field. Most of the public doesn't even understand there are evidence-based therapies. This is all just within academia and our professions. And you'll hear professors say, like, I use evidence-based therapy, and what they're saying is I use cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah.
And they'll literally say there is no evidence for psychodynamic therapy. There's no evidence for Rogerian. There's no evidence for humanistic. It's all a bunch of old, outdated, unscientific crap. People will say Freud is unscientific. And it's like, well, yeah, Freud said a lot of things, but there are many things that Freud talked about that absolutely does have science backing it up. So this idea of just this bifurcation and this discarding of all these things not only annoys me because I love all theories, and to dog on a theory that I like bothers me, but two, a lot of people are being mistreated, and people will email in and say, yeah, I went to a therapist and I have all these relational traumas. And after listening to your podcast, I think I was on a spectrum of this personality disorder. And my therapist doesn't even believe in personality disorders or attachment theory, and just talked about skills the whole time, and wanted to do it in 5 sessions and said I was cured, and I didn't feel cured at all. And it's a total disservice, and it makes us look like idiots. When people in their own field are claiming things, including professors, by the way, because these people aren't being, they don't come to these conclusions on their own. Professors are telling them this because essentially we have professors that have political opinions about certain theoretical orientations. It's like Freud is, I don't know, just sexist. They have this extremely narrow vision of it, the way that like a Republican has a narrow vision of the lib, and they just discard it completely. And it's like, where is your academic integrity? Where is your research integrity? Like you get out of your little echo chamber, and there's just mounds of evidence. There are people, you're not going to get any legitimate journal by saying such a stupid thing. In legitimate journals, there's plenty of research showing in lit reviews describing the evidence of humanistic and psychodynamic therapies as an umbrella term. And so it's really, I don't know, it's just another thing that I get embarrassed about our field, because I feel like other fields, they don't have this. I feel like in other fields, in medicine, for example, there's certainly pseudoscience within medicine, but not as much. I just feel like it's hard to find anyone that really understands the landscape, because it's blind leading the blind. How many professors understand the landscape? And it's not many, honestly, in my experience. And so, yeah, that's that rant for that. All right, let's take a break and answer more emails. What do you say, Bob?
Yes.
All right, we're back from the break. I thought I'd do an OPP for patrons that have been patrons for a long time. We have these people became patrons in October of 2019, back before the pandemic,
Wow.
and have stayed patrons the whole time, Bob. We got Jane from Denmark. Not sure. DK. Do you think that's Denmark?
I think that's Denmark.
Let me make sure. DK country code. We have Denmark. We got Keith and Jamie and from God knows where. We have Helena from Czechoslovakia or Bern. Is that Czechoslovakia?
I thought that's Austria, isn't it? Or Germany?
Switzerland. It's Switzerland. Bern. Right. Yeah, Bern. That's one of the major. We have Bernie from Seattle. So we have Helena from Bern, and we have Bernie from Seattle, who's an upper tier patron. We got Patrick, who's an upper tier patron from Alaska.
Wow, right on.
Wasilla, Alaska. Where is Wasilla, Alaska?
Yeah.
I got to look this up.
We're having geography lesson.
Yeah. Wasilla, Alaska is near Anchorage, up into the mountains from Anchorage. So way the heck up there. Did you know I'm taking a little cruise boat up to Alaska?
I did know that.
With my family.
When do you go?
This summer.
This summer. Right on.
And there's a lot of hiking into the woods. Oh, and you'll appreciate this. So you and my wife both have tsunami phobias.
Oh yeah.
And so she is staying awake at night worrying that we'll be on the coast or in the boat and a tsunami will kill us all. So I had a talk with her about, because I suffer from anxiety too, but because I'm a therapist, have learned over 25 years to treat myself and my phobias, meaning that I don't necessarily not have anxiety, because I do, but at least I have some roadmap to deal with it. She has no roadmap. It's just like, it's real. The anxiety is real, and everyone's an idiot for not recognizing it.
She's not interested in treating that as a phobia.
Well, she's married to a therapist, so I'm treating her, and she's accepting it.
Does she know
whether she wants it or not?
Does she know she's being? Wow.
No, she's not a super. She'd be one of the last people I would think would ever go to therapy.
Yeah,
and she is open to me trying to help her.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't resent it or, push back at all, but, and yeah, but once we're on the boat, I'm guessing she'll be okay. And nothing that a couple Xanax can't help. Caitlin from upper tier patron from Bellingham, Matthew from God knows where, Melissa from Las Vegas, Nicole from Seattle.
Wow.
Emily from Roy, Utah. And Kelsey from New Brighton, Minnesota. New Brighton, Minnesota. Where's that? Kind of sounds like an exciting place. It's not Old Brighton. It's New Brighton. Oh, it's in Minneapolis. It's just a neighborhood. And is that right? New Brighton?
It's cold there.
Yeah. When I was in Minneapolis, I found it to be very reminiscent of Seattle, at least in the summer. Have you been?
Only once, and just passing through, and it was in April, but it was like below freezing. It was really cold.
Yeah. Okay. Next email, anonymous listener says, I put off listening to your episode with Bob about crying together again recently because my grandmother just passed away unexpectedly, and I was afraid to be triggered by it. But funnily enough, it's almost like she is in that episode, because in that episode, you talk about the movie Little Big Man.
Oh, yeah.
And the old Native man in Little Big Man that you were talking about on the podcast was my grandmother's grandfather.
Wow.
Yeah. What's more is that my grandmother was actually brought my grandmother had actually brought her grandmother up a mountain to die when my grandmother was 5, just like in the scene in Little Big Man. So just chiming in here, I don't remember that much from my childhood in the 70s, but one of the memories I have is watching Little Big Man with Dustin Hoffman. It's a period piece from like the 1800s or early 1900s. And Dustin Hoffman, it's kind of like Forrest Gump in that the Dustin Hoffman character goes from rags to riches to rags. And, you know, he travels around and experiences Native Americans and experiences white people. You know, there's just various different little moments and scenes that he goes through. And one of the scenes that he goes through is there's this hero character, a wise old Native American man, might have been a chief, I'm not sure. And he tells Dustin Hoffman character, he's like, it's my time to die. We must go to the sacred mountain and you must lay me down and there I will die. And so, Dustin Hoffman's character, you know, they trudge up the mountain and lays him down. And then he closes his eyes and he's going to die. And it's this really moving moment. And Dustin Hoffman is standing there going, oh my God, he's going to die. This is terrible. And then it starts to rain and we see that the old man is flinching from the raindrops hitting his face. And you're like, oh, he's not dead yet. Because the whole setup is like, oh, he's going to die. He's a wise old man. He knows he's going to die. And then he opens his eyes and he says something like, he just says something like, I guess today isn't the day I die. And then they go back down the mountain. And it just, I don't know, there's something about it that makes me want to cry right now. I don't know. It's just something like so funny and touching. And, and I don't know if I mentioned this, but there wasn't much about Japanese Americans growing up. There were things about Native Americans. And whenever I would see Native American depictions, it really reminded me of my elderly Japanese American relatives. There's a certain cadence to the way Japanese people talk that's similar to Native American, or the way Native Americans are depicted in movies. And there's a certain ethic of life and the way they hold themselves with a certain, I don't know, demeanor. And this movie, and I would watch this movie with my family, particularly with my dad. My dad really loved this movie. And it was on back in the day in the 70s, you didn't have VCR. You just had to wait for a movie to come on like one of the three channels, ABC, NBC, or CBS. And it must have been one of those movies that was in heavy rotation. It was the same thing with The Wizard of Oz. Like every year it would come on one time a year and everyone would plan for it. This weekend, it's going to be on TV and everyone would watch it. But, so I was talking about the movie anyway. So Anonymous Listener is saying my grandmother was his granddaughter. And so he's saying what's more is my grandmother had actually brought her grandmother up, not, you know, the wife, I guess, of him potentially, up a mountain to die when my grandmother was 5, just like in the scene in Little Big Man. She didn't witness the death, but helped her up the mountain, left her there, and went back home. The next morning, her dad came home and they went up and found the grandma's body. So it was a thing that they, and not only a thing that they did back in the day of the time of this movie being set, but in recent history, you know? Although I guess I don't know how old Alana's sister was.
Right.
The next morning, her dad, this would have been 1955, and Little Big Man is in 1970. So I wonder if this scene was suggested by Chief Dan George. That was the actor's name. It is definitely my family's sense of humor to make light of a morbid cultural practice, LOL. Anyway, I hope this is interesting to Dr. Kirk. There's also a great video of Chief Dan George that is very powerful and important to Indigenous people. It's called A Lament for Confederation. It is in reference to Canada's 50th anniversary. We're Canadian. Thanks for doing all that you do. Yeah. So that's interesting, right, Bob?
It's nice.
Yeah, I always love it when people email in stuff like that. Anonymous Upper-Tier Patron, she says, I am studying to become a therapist, and I recently read that one educational institution requires further therapists to adhere to certain, or future therapists to adhere to certain expectations for behavior and emotional regulation. So let me read that again. I'm studying to become a therapist, and I recently read that one educational institution, so it must be a university or something, requires future therapists to adhere to certain expectations for behavior and emotional regulation. I recently left a job in which my manager, a psychologist, sexually harassed another worker and me. They were callous towards me after a client threatened me, excluded me from socializing with other workers, and he expressed poor attitudes about clients, including fantasies of using violence against them. Just chiming in here. That doesn't surprise me. Does that surprise you at all, Bob?
It's horrifying. I don't know if it's surprising, but it sucks.
It doesn't surprise me. To hear about someone working at a institution, a mental health institution, particularly someone in power, having fantasies of, when you put it that way, you're just like, whoa, that sounds, but for a therapist in case consultation behind closed doors to say like, oh my God, this one client drives me crazy. I just want to strangle her or something.
Oh, that's a little different. But that's not what I heard. Did I mishear?
Fantasies of using violence against them. I mean, I don't know. They didn't say what specifically that means, but I'm guessing that's what it meant. Who knows? Huh. If it's actual, like, I have active, obsessive, ruminative fantasies of harming my clients, I imagine they would have given that detail anyway. He expressed poor attitudes about clients. I've just chiming in. I have found that to be extremely common among therapists who are stressed out about working at a high productivity, agency without any kind of mentorship or help or anything. Yeah. And bad leadership, essentially. Because for me, whenever I'm in charge and I have the opportunity to push back on that, when I have subordinates saying things like that about clients, I'll say, whoa, it sounds like countertransference. What's going on with you? Right. Like, that's not going to fly. You're not going to dog on your clients. Like, you can't have one, that's not fair because your clients are coming to you. It's not like you're complaining about someone you met on the bus. This is someone under your care. And it's not like you're a plumber. Like, if you have a bad attitude about a client, you're going to, at the very least, not help them and potentially harm them. So let's look at that. It's okay to have hatred towards a client. Winnicott taught us that in 1949, but it's not something that I'm going to go along with as if that's normative talk among therapists, to just talk crap about your clients. No, they come for us. And, I always say, why do people come to us? Because they have problems. And if their problems, which you got trained to, and you chose, this was what you wanted to do, it's not like plumbers go home and go, oh my God, everyone had problems with their pipes. I mean, it was just so stupid of them. It's like, well, that's your profession. That's why we got into this profession because people have personality and psychological problems, which might include them being annoying to you. And so if you can't cope with it, then get out of the freaking business. Anyway, so Anonymous Subject Patron is talking about this bad boss. As I tried to speak up about this manager's behavior through appropriate channels, and by the way, she spelled behavior with a U, so this must be outside the US. As I tried to speak up about this manager's behavior through appropriate channels, other managers who are also psychologists and social workers and HR retaliated against me, and I was ultimately pushed out, with HR making a comment that I had been a problem from the start. I heard through my contacts that my former manager is still a manager there, and he was given the responsibility of hiring my replacement. I feel very angry with everyone who participated, and I want nothing to do with them. But as I am studying to enter their field, so it sounds like they're not a therapist, fully fledged yet. I'm worried that someday I will see them at a conference event or another workplace. I want to avoid them, even if they try to talk to me, and I would consider quitting if I learned that they worked with me. But I am worried this will make me look like a bitch, quote unquote. Therefore, giving the impression to others in the industry that I do not meet the behavioral expectations for being a therapist. So just chiming in here, remember she said earlier that she read that they require future therapists to adhere to certain expectations for behavior and emotional regulation. And so she's worried, it's like, well, if I bump into them and I have like a breakdown, am I going to be considered unethical or unfit or something?
Well, if I just don't engage with them, does that mean I'm a bitch?
Right. Yeah. Alternatively, I am worried I will cry from seeing them, which would give the impression I do not meet the expectations for emotional regulation. For me, to meet the expectations for becoming a therapist, am I expected to be collegial towards these people and keep my emotions under wrap if I see them? Bob, what do you think?
It'd be hard to imagine that there would be any real consequence to you, like professionally, if you choose not to socialize or engage with people you don't like. You don't have to like them. That's not dysregulated. Um, that's just you, you know,
Not liking
behaving.
someone.
Yeah, that's your preference. You don't like being around them. There's nothing unethical about that. There's nothing. There's nothing wrong with disapproving of their behavior, and also with having a bad taste in your mouth about the way you were treated. Sure, but I don't think that it's likely to result in any kind of complaint against you, or it certainly won't mean that you aren't suited for work. If you cry, yeah, maybe it will. Um,
So what do you mean?
well, if I come across somebody and I've had this crappy history or whatever, yeah, I suppose tears is one thing that might happen. I might have tears,
Right.
but like you're talking about like a conference.
Yeah.
You're
Oh,
not
I thought
talking
you
about.
meant it might happen. You might have a negative like career consequence if you.
Oh no, you might have tears, and if you do, it's a moment, and maybe you don't like it. You don't like being that exposed or whatever to people who feel vulnerable in front of, or who think they would like use your feelings against you or to hurt you or whatever. But you're not on this earth to please them. You're not on, and you don't really have to protect yourself from their opinion of you. It's maybe they don't like you either. It's okay. Um, so it just seems like you're scared. You're also new, and you feel like more anxious about this than is likely to actually. How am I going to say this? Your anxiety is probably disproportionate to your risk.
Right. Have you ever heard such a thing of future therapists adhering to certain expectations for emotion? I mean, behavior. Okay, sure. I mean, but emotional regulation.
I don't really know what that means.
Yeah, neither do I. So, anonymous subject or patron, I don't know where you're at. You use a
Yeah.
you in your behavior word. So, I suspect you're not in the stage, which makes me think you're not a part of any a professional organization that Bob and I are, aware of specifically.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
it's possible that if you're in the UK, that there's a different, or Australia or Canada or something, there's a different set of ethical expectations. But I
Yeah.
highly doubt it. I'm very familiar with all the various professional expectations in the States, and nothing of which you talk about would raise one's risk of being harmed
Yeah.
professionally. And so I would look into anonymous secretary patron, what exactly those requirements are, because
Yeah.
they're pretty specific. And I would also, to ease your anxiety, ask a lawyer who specializes in your profession, and just run by that individual what the likely scenarios are. Someone thinking you're a B word, or you breaking down at a conference, or you quitting a job because you don't want to see people that you don't like. What the possible repercussions of that were, worst case scenario. I'm guessing the lawyer would know a lot more than we would. And I'm also guessing the lawyer would say there's extremely low risk to that. I will say though that someone can complain about you about anything. So someone might have already complained about you. They might have already sent a thing in and saying this person is unfit for this reason. There's no way to prevent a complaint happening. But at least in the States, the review boards of such complaints, there's a pretty high bar for any kind of action being taken. I mean, you'd be surprised what they do not act on. There are things where that therapist is busted, and then nothing happens because it's just the culture of those kinds of review boards. And then even if they do respond, their sanction upon you is actually pretty light. I mean, in my experience, if there was a complaint, I've seen cases like this in the review board, and for licensing, and there might be a situation where a therapist gets a complaint that they are doing something behaviorally that Because usually what we're dealing with when we're dealing with complaints on therapists is they're either having sex with a client and harming a client, or they are fraudulent in some way around billing, or they are treatment wise found to have harmed a client. Maybe there was a suicide or something. And those are obvious, flashpoints for complaints to happen because you have someone who is aggrieved. When it comes to therapists complaining about other therapists, that doesn't happen very often. It's not often that a therapist will call the licensing board to complain about a colleague. You'd have to, because when you're a client, say you're a client, or say you're a mother and your daughter dies from suicide and your daughter was in therapy, you're upset naturally. And a percentage of those people will want to blame the therapist. Will say, hey, why, my daughter was in therapy. What happened there? And so you're motivated to complain and you're motivated to follow up with the complaint. If you are just a therapist observing a coworker who happens to, in your view, have some quirks behaviorally that are annoying to you as a coworker and makes you even think that the therapist is a bad therapist, it's really rare that that person will call the licensing board. It's also really rare that the licensing board will hear that because they'll have to say, well, do you know of any clients who have been harmed? You are this person's colleague. Do you have any examples of you have suspicions of client harm happening? Do you have any evidence of such a claim? And it'd be really weird for a colleague to have strong evidence that you harmed a client. And even then, like I said, it would have to be obvious harm, like having sex with a client or a client dying. There's a really high bar for even, at least in my neck of the woods, for a licensing board to entertain such a complaint. So as Bob was saying, the worries that you have are in all likelihood overblown. The other thing I'll say is that Anonymous Upper-Tier Patron, if you've listened to this podcast long enough, you know that I was fired from my first internship. And I write about this in my book in the first chapter. It's the whole basis for why I wanted to become as good of a supervisor as I could to my supervisees, is because my very first supervisor was completely abusive. Well, actually, he was technically my second supervisor. My first supervisor I had for like 2 weeks, and then he quit, and he was great. And then I was given this other guy who would never supervise anyone before, I found out later. And I would run into him in other, because Seattle's a small town, and I would run into him. In fact, we would share supervisees. I would have supervisees who would have him as a supervisor.
Damn.
And stuff like that. And so it was hard, it was politically hard. It was emotionally hard. And I had emotional reactions to the point where years later, I ran into him at a conference and confronted him. And I had zero worry that I would have a negative consequence to my career. I had zero worry that if he complained about me and said, oh, Kirk has this bone to pick with me and he has a problem. Like, knowing what I know about the licensing board and about consequences for such things, I have zero worry. And so in my neck of the woods, Anonymous Upper-Tier Patron, I had the exact same thing happen to me and had the exact experience that you're worried about, where I ran into him at a conference. I actually provoked a confrontation between me and him. And I took all the risks that you're worried about. I might have even cried in the moment. And I have no worry about it, And honestly, if there were a consequence, I don't want to be in a profession that consequences being a human being.
Yeah, that's what stands out to me. Is it's almost as if the interpretation of this behavioral and emotional regulation stuff is robbing a person of their humanity. That's crazy.
Right.
You're a person. You're going to have a range of feelings and behaviors.
Right.
And that's not going to change just because what you choose to do for a living.
And I would suspect that whatever educational institution you're referring to that requires future therapists to adhere to certain expectations for behavior and emotional regulation has a history of sexism and racism and oppression, because that kind of language is the bullshit of the man. That kind of, I will judge your behavior and your emotional expressions. Like that is a massively sexist, paternalistic, nonsensical ridiculousness. And I will not stand for it. So let me know if you need me to strike back at this institution if they're being unfair, because that sounds like the 60s to me, which is just not okay. Hot and bothered, Bob.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.